A man kneels at the edge of an empty temple. He is the last priest who can still read the gods' names. He raises a chisel. He carves one sentence into stone. When he sets the chisel down, no one will read these signs again, not for 1,400 years. His name was Esmet Akhom, second priest of Isis at Philae, an island in the southernmost reach of Egypt. The year was 394 of the Christian era. The Roman Empire had been dying around him for 100 years. Most temples had been closed by imperial decree. His was one of the last where the old gods were still served. On the 24th of August, he climbed the Gate of Hadrian. He carved a short dedication to a Nubian god named Mandulis. The signs were rough. The grammar was imperfect. He may have known only a handful of standard phrases by then, but his hand still moved. He still remembered what each shape meant. He was the last man on earth who did. 3,500 years before him, another man had carved the first hieroglyphs into a slate palette in Hierakonpolis. His name we still pronounce, Narmer. He had unified the two lands, the Green Valley and the Dark Delta, into one kingdom. His scribes had set down on stone the names of his enemies, the names of his cities, the name of his bull. From that palette to Esmet Akhom's gate, the same writing carried Egypt across 30 dynasties, 3 great kingdoms, 2 collapses, and 7 foreign conquests. Then it stopped. For 1,428 years, no one could read it. Arab scholars tried. Renaissance priests tried. Everyone failed. Everyone believed the signs were mystical pictures, secret allegories, anything but ordinary writing. Then, on the 14th of September of 1822, in a small Paris apartment, a 31-year-old Frenchman named Jean-François Champollion compared 2 cartouches from the temple of Abu Simbel. He saw something no one had seen since Esmet Akhom. He stood up. He ran through the streets to his brother's office at the Institute. He shouted 4 words, "Je tiens l'affaire," I have it. Then he collapsed on the floor. He did not wake for 5 days. When he did, 3,500 years of voices began to speak again. This is their story. From Narmer's palette to Esmet Akhom's chisel, the civilization that wrote longer than any other, and the man who, 14 centuries later, gave it back its voice. A man stands at the edge of the river. He is barefoot. His feet sink into mud the color of charcoal. Behind him, 3 steps back, the mud ends. The desert begins. Sand the color of bone, going on for 1,000 miles in every direction. This is where his people live, on the dark stripe between 2 deserts. They call the dark stripe Kemet, the black land, for the silt the river leaves behind when it floods every July. They call the desert Deshre, the red land, and they bury their dead in it because the dryness keeps the bodies whole. The river rises every year on a schedule the priests already know how to read. It floods in July. It recedes in October. It leaves behind soil that grows wheat and barley in such excess that one farmer can feed 10 others. There is no other place on earth quite like this one. The Mesopotamians, who are also building cities at this hour, must struggle with 2 unpredictable rivers and a flood that sometimes destroys their fields. The Egyptians have one river that almost never lies. They will build a civilization on top of that fact. By the year 4000 before Christ, villages have begun to grow into towns along the river. Hierakonpolis in the south, where Chieftains are buried with mace heads carved with their victories. Buto in the north, where the marshes give way to the sea. Nakada in between, where pottery and copper and lapis flow up the Nile from trade routes that already reach Mesopotamia. On the clay jars from these towns, simple signs begin to appear. They are not yet writing. They are something almost. They are about to become. The towns do not yet share a king. They share a river and a calendar. Slowly, generation by generation, the southern chieftains begin absorbing their neighbors. We know a few of their names from Broken Stone. Irihor, Ka, possibly a man called Scorpion. They are the predecessors. They are not yet remembered by their own people as the start of anything. The man whom Egypt itself remembered as the start was still a few generations away. His name would be Narmer. A young man stands in the desert outside Hierakonpolis. The sun is setting. In front of him, 4 workmen are filling in a shaft tomb that has just received the body of his father. His father had been the king of this town. So had the 4 kings before him. Each had pushed the borders outward, north into the marshes, east into the gold country, south against the Nubians. None had finished. The young man will inherit the unfinished work. He is perhaps 25 years old. We do not know to which mother he was born. We do not know what he looked like. We know 2 signs his scribes will carve to spell his name: a catfish, a chisel. In Egyptian, Nur and Mr. Narmer. 30 years from this evening, he will be remembered by every man between the first cataract and the sea as the founder of their kingdom. He inherits a Nile that runs to the edge of the delta. He takes the rest, pushing into the 7 mouths of the river. When he is finished, the 2 are one. He takes both their crowns, the white crown of the south, the red crown of the north. He wears them as a single double crown no king before him has ever worn. Around 3,100 years before Christ, his sculptors carve a slate palette to commemorate what he has done. It is dark green stone, shaped like a shield. On one side, Narmer wears the white crown and brings a stone mace down on a kneeling enemy. On the other, he wears the red crown and walks past the bodies of the men who fought him. Above him on both sides, his sculptors do something new. They write a small rectangle. Inside, 2 signs: the catfish, the chisel, the king's name. It is one of the first hieroglyphic inscriptions in the world. The signs are not pictures of a fish and a tool. They are sounds. They are letters a scribe in Thebes or Alexandria will still recognize 3,000 years later, with no instruction needed. This palette, found in 1898 in the town where his father lay buried, is the first page of Egyptian history. The Catfish King had invented his own memory. An architect stands in the desert at Saqqara. He is a tall man in his 50s, dressed in the white linen of a high priest. In front of him, hundreds of workmen are stacking blocks of limestone the way a child stacks toys, one square on top of another, each square smaller than the last. He has told the king he can build a tomb of stone that will not rot. He has been given 20 years to prove it. His name is Imhotep. He is a scribe, an astronomer, a doctor, a high priest of Heliopolis, and an architect. He is the kind of man who appears once in 1,000 years. 2,000 years from this morning, the Egyptians will turn him into a god. He is the first architect anywhere on earth whose name we still know. He stacks 6 mastabas, one on top of the other. He cases them in white limestone, 60 meters into the sky. It is the first stone monument in human history. 3 generations later, a king named Snefru tries to go further. He builds a pyramid at Medum that collapses. He builds another at Dashur that bends halfway up because the angle is too steep. He builds a third, the Red Pyramid, that finally stands. By the time Snefru dies, his masons have learned what stone can do. His son Khufu uses what they have learned. He chooses a plateau outside Memphis called Giza. He gives his architects 20 years and the labor of his kingdom. They cut and lay 2 1/3 million blocks of limestone, each weighing more than a small car. They raise them 146 meters into the sky. The sides are aligned to true north with an error of 0.003 of a degree. The casing is white limestone, and in sunlight, the pyramid is visible from 100 kilometers away. It is the tallest building on the planet. It will remain the tallest building on the planet for the next 3,800 years. The men who build it are not slaves. We know this because we have found their village. We have found their cemetery. We have found their bakeries, their breweries, their hospital, the bones of their broken legs that healed under the king's physicians. The foreman of one gang signed his name on a block hidden inside the pyramid. He called his crew the Friends of Khufu. These men were proud. A provincial governor stands on the bank of the Nile in his nome of Mo Allah. The river is meters lower than it should be at this season. It has been this way for years. The seasonal flood, which has fed his people for 3,000 years, is failing. He looks north toward Memphis. The king cannot help him. The grain reserves of the central state have run dry. The royal architects have stopped building pyramids. The king cannot afford them. The royal army has not marched in a generation. The capital is busy fighting itself. 6 kings have died on the throne in 15 years. The governor raises a private army from his own people. He hires scribes. He carves himself a tomb in the cliffs above his town. That would have been illegal a century before, because such tombs had been a privilege of the throne alone. The throne could no longer enforce it. His name is Anktifi. On the walls of his tomb, he carves a sentence no Egyptian had dared write before. I gave bread to the hungry. I clothed the naked. I kept Upper Egypt alive in a year when the whole country was dying. This is the first intermediate period, around 2180 before Christ. The old kingdom stopped working. The drought that crippled it was real. Climate scientists call it the 4.2 kiloyear event, a failure of monsoon rains that broke civilizations from the Indus to Mesopotamia. The plagues that followed were real. The corruption in Memphis was real. The dynasty fell. For 130 years, Egypt was 2 countries, one in the north, ruled from Heracleopolis, one in the south, ruled from Thebes, smaller, hungrier, fighting across a frontier that moved every year, but something happened in those years that had not happened before. The men in their provincial tombs began to write for themselves. They asked on their walls what a good life looked like. They wondered why bad men prospered and good men suffered. A scribe wrote a poem called The Dispute Between a Man and His Ba, in which a man argues with his own soul about whether to continue living. Egyptian literature was born in the dark. In a temple at Thebes, a young king is given a new name. He has been fighting for 14 years. He has buried an elder brother. He has marched up the Nile, then down the Nile, until the last king of Heracleopolis surrendered the delta. This morning, his priests crown him with both crowns, the white of the south, the red of the north. They give him a throne name, Sema Tawi, uniter of the 2 lands. It is the same name Narmer had taken 1100 years earlier in his own temple after his own act. The young king understands the inheritance. His given name is Mentuhotep. He is the second founder of Egypt. He has reabsorbed the provincial governors who had carved tombs for themselves in their own cliffs. He has taken his capital from Memphis and moved it to Thebes, which had been a small provincial town when his grandfather was born. Around 2040 before Christ, the long fragmentation ends. Egypt is one country again. The Middle Kingdom begins. His successors push outward. They build fortresses on the southern Nile, Buhan, Mirgissa, towers of mud brick set on the rock above the Second Cataract, garrisoned to control the gold caravans that come north from Nubia. They drain the marshes of the Fayum and turn them into farmland. They standardize the courts and the granaries. They reform the priesthoods. They turn the kingdom Mentuhotep had reassembled into a working state. And in the schools of that state, scribes copy a story written in this period that becomes the model of literary Egyptian for the next 1,500 years. The tale of Sinuhe. The story of an exile who longs to come home. Egyptian boys are still memorizing it under the Romans. In the British Museum today, a granite head from this period looks back at the visitor with heavy eyes and a tired mouth. It is the face of Senusret III, fifth king of the 12th dynasty. He is the first Egyptian king whose sculptors carved him not as a tud, but as a man bearing the weight of the kingdom on his face. The kingdom he carried was already cracking. In the desert outside Thebes, a king's body is being prepared for burial. The embalmers can do little to hide what was done to him. He had been killed in battle, surrounded by enemies. The forensic examiners who studied his mummy 3,000 years later counted the wounds on his skull and stopped at 5. He had not surrendered. His name was Sequenenretau, king of Thebes. For 150 years, Egypt had been split again. The kings of the 12th dynasty had been strong. The kings of the 13th were weaker. By 1700 before Christ, a Semitic people from the Levant had moved into the eastern delta, settled, multiplied, crowned their own pharaoh. The Egyptians called them the Hekahasut, rulers of foreign lands. The Greeks would later mishear that as Hyksos. They brought weapons the Egyptians had never seen: the horse, the chariot, the composite bow, the curved bronze sword called the khopesh. With these, they took the delta. They ruled from a new capital called Avaris on the easternmost branch of the Nile, facing Syria. The kings of Thebes, 800 kilometers to the south, paid tribute to them for 3 generations. Then Sequenenre refused. He died for it. His son Kamosa continued the war. The Theban army had learned the new weapons by capturing them. They forged their own chariots. They trained their own bowmen. Kamose was killed in his 3rd campaign. His younger brother Amosa, a child when their father was murdered, took the throne and finished what the family had started. By 1550 before Christ, the last Hyksos king had been driven out of the delta across Sinai into the Levant. Ahmose was crowned king of all Egypt. His dynasty would be the 18th. The era he opened would be called the New Kingdom. It would last 500 years. It would conquer farther than any pharaoh before. It would build temples larger than any king before. It would bury its kings in a hidden valley in the western cliffs. It would also change the face of Egypt forever. At his desk in Thebes, the young king who has just driven the Hyksos out of the delta dictates a letter to his scribe. The scribe presses a brush to papyrus and writes the king's words. The signs flowing under the brush are the same signs that Narmer's sculptors carved into the slate palette at Hierakonpolis 1,550 years earlier. A catfish for Enuror, a chisel for Mr. The same letters, the same alphabet, the same script, unbroken by two collapses, one foreign conquest, and the deaths of nearly 300 kings. The state has fractured and reformed twice. The capital has moved 4 times. The gods have multiplied. The language has aged into a new dialect, but the writing has not changed. The page now turns to the era that the world remembers when it closes its eyes and pictures Egypt. Hatshepsut, the woman who ruled as a king. Thutmose, the conqueror. Akhenaten, the heretic. Tutankhamun, the boy. Ramses, the monumental. Karnak, Abu Simbel, the hidden valley in the western cliffs where they buried their kings. This is the new kingdom. It is also the last great ark. When it falls, in 1069 before Christ, Egypt will never again be what it was. But the writing will continue for another 1,400 years. In a temple at Karnak, a woman in her late 20s stands before her priests. She has been the regent of Egypt for 7 years. The boy for whom she is regent is now 9, old enough to be crowned. But the kingdom has been hers in everything but name, and she has decided this is no longer enough. Tonight, her priests place a ceremonial beard on her chin, drape her body in the kilt of a pharaoh, give her the crook and the flail. From this morning, in every inscription of her reign, she will be drawn as a man. Her pronouns will become masculine. Her titles will become those of a king. The boy will continue to live in the palace, bear his royal name, and wait. He will wait for 21 years. Her name was Hatshepsut. She was the daughter of one pharaoh, the wife of another, the stepmother of a third. She ruled as the 5th. Her reign produced almost no wars. It produced an empire of buildings. She restored the temples the Hyksos had damaged. She raised obelisks at Karnak. The tallest one still standing is hers. She reopened the trade routes south to Nubia and east to the Sinai. In the 7th year of her reign as king, she sent 5 ships down the Red Sea on a voyage no Egyptian had made in 300 years. The destination was Punt, a land on the coast of what is now Eritrea, rich in myrrh and ebony and incense. The expedition came back loaded. Her artists carved the voyage on her temple walls. The king of Punt, his enormously fat queen, houses on stilts above the water. Frankincense trees lifted onto Egyptian ships in clay pots to be replanted at Karnak. Her temple was at Deir el-Bahari, west of Thebes. 3 terraces cut into the cliff, ramps between them, columns twice as wide as a man. It is still standing. When she died, the boy she had outranked finally became king. He took the throne at 30. 20 years later, he sent men with chisels to erase her face from certain walls. He did not erase her completely, perhaps to protect his own line. The omissions are still visible at Karnak today. In a tent on a Levantine hillside, a 33-year-old king sits in council with his generals. They are arguing with him. Below them, in the valley to the north, a coalition of 330 Canaanite kings has assembled to break the Egyptian empire. They have taken the city of Megiddo, the place from which the medieval word Armageddon will one day come. The Egyptian army has marched 800 kilometers from the delta to face them. 3 roads run forward. 2 are wide, safe, predictable. The third, a narrow defile called the Aruna Pass, allows only single file. If the enemy is waiting at the far end, the army will be lost as it emerges, 1 man at a time. The generals argue for the safe roads. The king listens. Then he announces that he will take the Aruna Pass himself, on foot, leading the army through it before the enemy expects him. His name is Thutmose III, the boy whom Hatshepsut had outranked. He has been waiting since he was 9 years old. The pass is empty. The Canaanite coalition, which had not believed any general would be insane enough to use the Aruna, is positioned at the wrong roads. The Egyptian army falls on them at dawn. By evening, Megiddo is besieged. Within the month, it has surrendered. It is May 4th, 1457 before Christ. It is the first battle in recorded human history of which we have a detailed day-by-day account. The account is carved on the walls of Karnak in a chamber that came to be called the Hall of Annals. It runs to thousands of words. Thutmose will fight 17 campaigns over the next 20 years. He will push the Egyptian frontier to the river Euphrates, where his stonecutters will carve a stela by the water, claiming that he reached the place where the river flows backward. Egyptologists call him the Napoleon of Egypt. He is the only one of the great conquerors of the ancient world whose battles still survive, in his own words, in stone, where he put them. The empire he built will outlive him by 3 centuries. His great-grandson will give it away to a god. In year 5 of his reign, the king of Egypt rides into the desert 200 kilometers north of Thebes. He stops at a curve of barren hills where no city has ever stood. He climbs down from his chariot. He drives a stake into the sand. He announces that this place has chosen itself. The god has revealed it to him. No man has owned it before. It belongs to the sun disk alone. He gives it a name, Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten. He gives himself a new name as well. He had been born Amenhotep. Amun is satisfied. He had been crowned Amenhotep IV. From this morning, Amun is no longer satisfied. The king will be called Akhenaten, effective for the Aten. What he is doing has no precedent in Egyptian history. He is closing the temples of Amun. He is closing the temples of Osiris, of Ptah, of Hathor, of Thoth, of Anubis. He is removing every god from the religion of his people except one, the disk of the sun. He moves the capital. He moves the priesthood. He moves his queen, Nefertiti, who walks beside him in inscriptions where no Egyptian queen had walked before. Sometimes in her own chariot, sometimes wearing the crown of a king herself. His artists are ordered to draw the royal family in a way no Egyptian had drawn its kings before. Skulls elongated, hips wide, arms long and thin. Akhenaten kisses his daughter on her mouth. Nefertiti nurses her child in public. The royal children are shown weeping at the death of a sister. It is naturalism imposed by decree. He composes a hymn to the Aten that has been carved on tomb walls at Amarna. It begins, "How beautiful you appear in the horizon of the sky, living disk, beginning of life." Lines of it parallel a Hebrew psalm written 6 centuries later, Psalm 104. Whether one borrowed from the other or both drew from a common source remains debated. He reigned for 17 years. When he died, his successor moved the capital back, reopened the temples, restored the gods. The boy who would complete the restoration was 9 years old. His name was Tutankhamun. It would take 3 years to undo what Akhenaten had done. 3,000 years later, in the rubble of his sculptor's workshop, archaeologists recovered a painted limestone bust of Nefertiti, never finished, one eye not yet inlaid. It is in Berlin today. The most beautiful face we have from the ancient world belonged to a woman whose god was forgotten in a generation. On November 26, 1922, an English archaeologist stands at the bottom of a shaft in the Valley of the Kings. He has been searching for this tomb for 7 years. He has run out of money. This is his last season. He and his men have spent the morning chiseling rubble out of the descending corridor. In front of him is a sealed door, plaster, royal cartouches, ancient seals still intact. He drills a small hole. He pushes a candle through. He looks in. Behind him, his patron, an English lord named Carnarvon, asks the question that will be quoted in every textbook for a century. "Can you see anything?" The archaeologist answers, "Yes, wonderful things." His name is Howard Carter. The tomb is Cave 62. The young king inside it had been buried for 3,245 years. His name was Tutankhamun. He had been a boy. He had been crowned at 9 years old. He had inherited a country shattered by his father's heresy. The temples were closed. The priesthoods were unemployed. The empire's allies in the Levant were sending desperate letters no one read, because the capital had been moved to a city that no longer wanted to exist. Akhenaten was emptying. The bureaucracy had relocated to Memphis and was waiting for instructions. The boy and his advisors undid the heresy. They moved the capital back. They reopened the temples of Amun. They changed the boy's birth name from Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten, to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. He reigned 9 years. He died around 18 of malaria and a broken leg that did not heal. His tomb was unfinished when he died. They buried him in a small one made for someone else. They closed it. They forgot him. It was the forgetting that saved him. Tomb robbers in the centuries that followed could not remember where the strange small king had been put. For 3,245 years, no one disturbed him. In 1922, Howard Carter found the first step. The face on his innermost coffin, 11 kilograms of beaten gold, became the most recognized face of the ancient world. It was the face of an 18-year-old. Two Hittite scouts are dragged into the Egyptian camp on the morning of May 12, 1274 before Christ. They have been beaten. Under questioning, they confess what they have been ordered to confess. The Hittite king Muwatalli is encamped 200 kilometers to the north and is afraid to fight. The Egyptian king believes them. He is 25 years old. He has crossed the Orontes River ahead of 3 of his 4 divisions, with only the Amun division around him, about 6,000 men. He has chosen a clearing north of the city of Kadesh and is setting up camp. Then a second pair of Hittite scouts is captured. These two are not so easy to break. Under questioning, they finally tell a different story. The Hittite army is not 200 kilometers north. It is 2 kilometers east, hidden behind the city. The king's name is Ramses II. Before he can finish redeploying, 2,500 Hittite chariots come around the city, cross the river, and slam into the Re division as it is fording. The Re division does not survive the encounter as a fighting unit. Its survivors flee north into Ramses's camp. Behind them come the chariots. Ramses takes what remains of the Amun division and leads a personal countercharge. The fight lasts hours. He is nearly captured. He is, by his own account, abandoned by his bodyguard at one point and prays to the god Amun for help. The fight is a chaos of dust, broken axles, and bodies in the river. The arrival of a 4th Egyptian unit, marching up from the Mediterranean coast, finally tips the balance. The Hittites withdraw into the city. Both armies bleed out for another day. Then both withdraw. The Battle of Kadesh was a draw. Ramses, in inscriptions covering the walls of every temple from Karnak to Abu Simbel, declared it a complete victory. He carved his own image larger than every other figure on the relief, charging the Hittite line alone, while smaller men cower behind him. 15 years later, in 1259 before Christ, Ramses and the Hittite king Hattusili III, Muwatalli's nephew, signed the first international peace treaty in human history. The Hittite copy was found at Hattusa on a clay tablet and is now in Istanbul. The Egyptian copy was carved at Karnak. A replica hangs at the United Nations in New York. He ruled for 66 more years. He outlived 12 of his sons. He fathered more than 100 children. He raised Abu Simbel, where 4 colossi of himself, 65 feet high, sit on the Nubian frontier facing south. He completed Karnak. He founded a new capital at Pi-Ramesses in the Delta. When he was buried in 1213 before Christ, the people who had been born in his reign were old. He had been pharaoh longer than they had been alive. Egyptians would call him Ozymandias. The Greek is a corruption of his throne name, User-Mat-Re. They would call him Ramses the Great. He was the last of the great ones. In a delta marsh in 1175 before Christ, an Egyptian king watches a fleet of foreign ships row up the eastern branch of the Nile. The ships have come from everywhere and nowhere. They are the same ships that have burned every great city of the Mediterranean Bronze Age in the past 30 years. Mycenaean Greece has fallen to them. The kingdom of Ugarit on the Syrian coast has burned. The Hittite Empire has been destroyed. They are now at the gates of Egypt. The king is Ramses III. He is the last grandson of the Ramses who outlived 12 sons. He has fortified the delta with chains across the river mouths and archers along the banks. As the foreign ships row in, he springs the trap. The relief at Medinet Habu shows what happened. Egyptian arrows strike the rowers. The boats foul on the chains. The men of the sea peoples are pulled from the water and bound. It is one of the few decisive Egyptian victories of this century and the only major land where the Bronze Age collapse failed to destroy the political order. But the cost was too great. The treasury was empty. In 1157 before Christ, the workers building the royal tombs at Deir el-Medina laid down their tools because their wages of grain were 3 months late. It was the first labor strike in recorded human history. Ramses III was killed in his own harem by a conspiracy of one of his queens. His successors, Ramses IV through the 11th, presided over a slow contraction. In 1069 before Christ, the 20th dynasty fell. The new kingdom ended. Egypt would not be a great empire again. At the Temple of Karnak, a king carves his name in hieroglyphs at the base of a new pillar. He is dark-skinned. He wears a double uraeus on his crown, 2 snakes instead of 1, to mark that he rules 2 countries at once. He is at the height of his power. His name is Taharka. He is the king of Cush, the kingdom that lies south of the First Cataract, and he is also the pharaoh of all Egypt. For 300 years, Egypt had been falling apart. Libyan warlords had ruled fragments of the delta. The temples had crumbled. The army was a memory. Around 750 before Christ, Taharka's uncle Philae, the king of Cush, had marched out of Nubia and reunified Egypt by force. He restored the temples. He revived the old hieroglyphic style. His inscriptions insisted that he was a more authentic Egyptian than the Egyptians. For 70 years, the 25th dynasty, the dynasty of black pharaohs from Nubia, ruled all of Egypt and was the most powerful state on the Nile in 3 centuries. In 671 before Christ, an Assyrian army of 40,000 men equipped with iron weapons Egypt did not yet have broke them. The Kushite kings retreated south to Napata. After the Assyrians went home, the strongest of their Delta clients, a man named Psamtik, declared independence and founded the 26th dynasty. For a century, Egypt was Egyptian again. Then the Persians came. In 525 before Christ, the army of Cambyses broke the Egyptian lines at Pelusium. For the first time in 26 centuries, Egypt belonged to a foreign throne. The Persians ruled for 120 years. Then they were thrown out briefly. Then they came back. Then in 332, Alexander of Macedon rode into Egypt without fighting a battle. The Egyptians, exhausted by Persian rule, opened the gates of every city. The priests of Amun at the oasis of Siwa crowned him the son of the god. He died 8 years later. His general Ptolemy took Egypt as his share of the empire. In Alexandria, around 240 before Christ, a librarian writes a calculation in the margin of a scroll. He has measured the angle of the sun's shadow at noon on the summer solstice. He has the angle measured in Siena, 800 kilometers south, where on that day the sun is directly overhead and a pole casts no shadow. He has calculated the difference. He has multiplied by the distance. He has arrived at a number. The number is the circumference of the earth. His name is Eratosthenes. He is the chief librarian of the Library of Alexandria. The number he wrote in the margin is wrong by less than 2%. The library where he worked was the largest collection of human knowledge in the ancient world. By the 2nd century before Christ, scholars in Alexandria had gathered between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls. Greek philosophy, Egyptian mathematics, Babylonian astronomy, the entire literary output of the Greek world that we still have. Above the harbor stood a lighthouse 130 meters high. The Pharaohs, a fire on its summit visible 50 kilometers out at sea. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Alexander had founded the city in 331. Under Ptolemy and his heirs, it became something stranger than any city before it. A Greek city of 500,000 people built on the soil of the Delta, ruled by Greek-speaking pharaohs who married their sisters in the Egyptian fashion and built temples to Greek gods alongside temples to Isis. Outside the city, the countryside continued exactly as it had for 3,000 years. Priests in temples at Edfu and Dendera and Philae continued to write in hieroglyphs. The Ptolemies funded their temples. Their priests added the Ptolemies' names to the cartouches. In 196 before Christ, in the village of Rosetta, the priests of Memphis issued a decree honoring the boy king Ptolemy V. They had it carved on a slab of black granodiorite in 3 scripts, hieroglyphs at the top, Demotic in the middle, Greek at the bottom. It was an ordinary stela of an ordinary year. It would be the most important stone ever quarried. In Alexandria, in 49 before Christ, a young queen leaves her palace through a back gate. She is 20 years old. She knows that her brother, who is also her co-ruler, who is also her husband, has signed an order for her death. His ministers wrote it. He is 12 and signed where they pointed. She raises a small army on the Syrian border. She waits. Her name is Cleopatra. She is the seventh of her family to bear the name. She is descended from the Ptolemy, who took Egypt as his share of Alexander's empire. She speaks 9 languages. She is the first Ptolemy in 300 years to learn Egyptian. Within months, the man who will change her life lands in Alexandria. Julius Caesar, in pursuit of his rival Pompey, has won the civil war and come to collect what Egypt owes Rome. Cleopatra has her self smuggled into his quarters, wrapped in a sack of bedding. By morning, she is his ally. By winter, she is his lover. By the next year, she has a son she names Caesarion. She is in Rome when Caesar is assassinated. She returns to Egypt and rules. 10 years later, Caesar's heir Octavian and his deputy, Mark Antony, divide the Roman world between them. She allies herself to Antony. She marries him. They have 3 children. They build a court at Alexandria that intends to be the equal of Rome. In 31 before Christ, off the western coast of Greece, their fleet meets Octavian's at a place called Actium. They lose. They flee to Alexandria. Antony does not survive the news, falsely delivered that she is already dead. She is not. On the 12th of August, 30 before Christ, Octavian's troops are in the city. Cleopatra is in her tomb chamber by the harbor. She has decided that she will not be displayed in his triumph in Rome. She lies down on a couch in her tomb chamber by the harbor. She does not wake. She was 39 years old. With her death, the dynasty of Ptolemy ended. The line of pharaohs that had begun 3,000 years earlier with Narmer ended. Egypt became a Roman province. On the 24th of August, 394 of the Christian era, a man we have already met climbs to the gate of Hadrian on the temple island of Philae. His name is Esmet-Akom. He is second priest of Isis. He is the last man on earth who can read the writing of his ancestors. The temple where he serves is the southernmost in Egypt. It has been kept open by imperial decree for 100 years, longer than any other, because the Nubian peoples to the south still send pilgrims here, and Constantinople prefers them peaceful. The rest of Egyptian religion has been closed. The Emperor Theodosius has ordered every pagan temple in the empire shut. The priesthoods have been disbanded. The schools where hieroglyphs were taught have been silent for 2 generations. Esmet-Akom carves a short dedication to the Nubian god Mandulis. The signs are crude. The grammar fails in places. He may know only the formulas his grandfather taught him. It is the last hieroglyph any human will write for 1,400 years. A century later, in the year 537, the Emperor Justinian sends the general Narses to close Philae for good. The priests are arrested. The cult statues are taken to Constantinople. The doors are sealed. A Christian church is built into one of the inner halls. The hieroglyphs remain where they had been carved. On every temple, from Karnak to Edfu, on obelisks, on tomb walls, visible, unreadable, Arab scholars in the 9th century tried. European scholars in the Renaissance tried. The Jesuit Athanasius Kircher came closest in the 17th century. He was wrong about almost everything, but he was right that hieroglyphs and Coptic were related. Everyone else believed the signs were mystical pictures, allegories, magic. For 1,428 years, the writing of Egypt was a ruin in plain sight. In 1799, French soldiers digging fortifications in the village of Rosetta found a slab of black granite covered in 3 scripts. The British took it from them 2 years later. It has been in London since 1802. A young Frenchman from Grenoble began studying copies of it when he was 11 years old. He had already learned Greek and Latin. By the time he was 16, he had mastered Hebrew, Arabic, Syriac, and Coptic. He had decided at the age of 13 that he would read the language of the pharaohs in his lifetime. His name was Jean-François Champollion. He worked for 19 years. On the 14th of September, 1822, he was comparing two royal cartouches that had recently arrived from Abu Simbel. He matched two signs to the Coptic word for son, Re. He matched another to the Coptic word for born, Ms. He read Ramses. He read Thutmose. The system clicked open. He stood up. He ran through the streets of Paris to his brother's office at the Institute. He shouted, "Je tiens l'affaire." I have it. Then he collapsed on the floor. He did not wake for 5 days. On the 27th of September, he stood before the Académie des Inscriptions et Belles Lettres and read a letter 8 pages long. He explained that hieroglyphs were not symbols. They were a writing system. They could be read. 1,428 years after Esmet Akhum set his chisel down, someone picked the language back up. For 3,100 years, between Narmer and Cleopatra, Egypt was a single political civilization. No other empire of the ancient world lasted as long. Sumer was shorter, Babylon was shorter, Persia was shorter. The Hittites, whose story this channel has told, lasted 1,500 years and then disappeared so completely that no one on Earth remembered they had existed until German archaeologists pulled their tablets out of the dirt 3,000 years later. But even Egypt as a state was not the longest thing about Egypt. The writing was. For 424 years after Cleopatra died, under Roman rule, under Christian rule, priests in temples in the Deep South continued to carve hieroglyphs. Esmet Akhum was the last of them. When he set down his chisel in 394, the writing had been continuously practiced for 3,494 years. Then it stopped. The hieroglyphs remained on every wall and obelisk and tomb door from Aswan to the Delta. Visible, beautiful, unreadable. For 1,428 years, the greatest civilization of the ancient Mediterranean was locked outside its own monuments. Egyptologists could not even confirm that the signs were writing. Most scholars believed they were mystical pictures. This is the most fragile thing this video has shown. Writing is not enough. Writing needs readers. The signs alone, without anyone alive who understood them, were decoration on stone. The civilization had survived losing its independence, its religion, and its spoken language. It had not survived losing the readers of its own script. In 1822, a Frenchman of 31 compared two cartouches in a small room in Paris and read what the priests of Karnak had written down 3,000 years before. In another century, archaeologists would open the tomb of a small king and read his name on his coffin. Without Champollion, Tutankhamun would have been an anonymous mummy. With Champollion, he was a boy of 18, son of Akhenaten of the 18th dynasty. This channel has told the stories of two other civilizations. China, whose script has been written without interruption for 32 centuries. The Hittites, whose script was so completely lost that we had to relearn their language to know they had ever existed. Egypt is the third case, a civilization in which the writing outlived the state, then died, and had to be brought back 14 centuries later for us to understand what we had been looking at all along. The monuments were always there. We did not know what they said until a man in Paris collapsed on his brother's floor with the answer. Writing is fragile, even the oldest, even the most beautiful. Without readers, it is stone with marks on it. The fact that you can sit here, 200 generations after Narmer, and hear what his sculptors put into a piece of slate is not a small thing. It is what one man earned us in a room in Paris 204 years ago. At the same hour, the Egyptians were beginning to bury their kings under stepped tombs at Saqqara, on the other side of the world, on the central coast of what is now Peru. A different people were building their own pyramids. Their pyramids were as tall, their plazas were as wide, their cities were older. They traded fish for cotton, anchovy for textiles. They had no army. They had no temples to gods of war. They had no defensive walls. They built without warfare, without ceramics, and, by every measure we can check, without writing. For 2,000 years they prospered. Then they vanished. They left nothing for any later civilization to read. No name we still pronounce. No king we can address. The next chapter of this channel is the story of the great civilization that chose not to write. Subscribe to the long thread. The next civilization is being prepared. Every empire ends. The thread does not.